I, 28 male, work as a structural drafter for a commercial construction firm. I usually keep my head down, put in my hours, and prefer a quiet, drama-free life. For 3 years, I was dating my now ex-girlfriend, 27F. She works in public relations for a mid-sized agency downtown. We didn't live together, but she shared a nice 2-bedroom apartment with her roommate, 26F, an accountant who I always got along with, though we rarely spoke outside of casual group settings. It was a Tuesday evening when the entire foundation of my life started showing cracks. I was just lying on my couch, scrolling through Instagram while waiting for a pizza delivery. I went to tag my girlfriend in a post about a band we both liked. When her profile loaded, my thumb hovered over the screen, completely still. Every single picture of us was gone. 3 years of holidays, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings, and our anniversary trip to the mountains. Just erased. Replaced by sleek, solo shots of her looking professional or posing alone at upscale bars. I didn't immediately panic. I figured it was an app glitch, so I refreshed the page. Still gone. I called her. She picked up on the third ring, and there was loud background noise, like she was at a restaurant, even though she had told me she was working late at the office. I kept my voice level and asked her why she deleted all our pictures. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, and then the explosion happened. She yelled so loudly, I had to pull the phone away from my ear, asking if I was seriously tracking her social media and telling me I was suffocating her. I told her I wasn't tracking her, I literally just went to tag her in something and noticed 3 years of my life were wiped from her page. She snapped back, her tone dripping with condescension, saying it was for work. She claimed her firm was doing a massive audit of their personal brands for a promotion track and they wanted a clean, curated, professional aesthetic. She told me having a messy grid full of couples' photos looked amateurish, that not everything was about me, and that I needed to get my insecurities in check. Then she just hung up. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment trying to process it. The explanation made sense on a surface level given her industry, but the sheer hostility in her voice didn't align with a simple aesthetic choice. The next day, I went over to her apartment to drop off some mail that had been mistakenly sent to my place. She wasn't home yet, but her roommate answered the door. She was holding a mug of coffee, looking totally exhausted. When I mentioned the argument from the night before, attempting to laugh it off as a misunderstanding about PR aesthetics, the roommate completely froze. She set her mug down on the counter and didn't say a word, but the look she gave me was a mixture of intense pity and sharp calculation. An hour later, as I was driving back to my place, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the roommate telling me we needed to talk, to meet her at a coffee shop on 4th Street, and to absolutely not tell my girlfriend. When I walked into the coffee shop, the roommate was sitting in a back booth with a manila folder on the table. She looked nervous. I sat down across from her, and she skipped the pleasantries entirely. She told me there was no public relations audit. She told me to check my girlfriend's tagged photos on her alt account, the private one she used for close industry friends. I didn't even know she had one, so the roommate logged into her own account, navigated to the page, and slid the phone across the table. There were dozens of photos. My girlfriend sitting in the lap of another man. My girlfriend kissing another man at a rooftop bar. My girlfriend holding hands with another man at a beach resort. The man in the photos was the roommate's boyfriend, 29M. He had supposedly moved to Chicago 3 months prior for a startup opportunity. He and the roommate had been doing long distance, or so she thought. The roommate's voice was shaking slightly, though her eyes were cold and focused, as she explained that he never went to Chicago. He had been living out of a long-stay hotel across town. My girlfriend had been with him every single weekend. She told me she was on a corporate retreat. They had been playing both of us. We sat at that small, wobbly wooden table for 3 hours, cross-referencing everything. The precision of their deceit was staggering. Every time I thought my girlfriend was working late, she was at the hotel. Every time the roommate thought her boyfriend was busy pitching investors in Illinois, he was out to dinner with a woman sleeping in the next room over. While we were piecing the timeline together, my phone vibrated. It was a text from my girlfriend. She wrote that she was still really upset about how controlling I was yesterday, that her anxiety was through the roof because of my toxic behavior. She then had the absolute nerve to say her car needed new brakes this week, and since I stressed her out so much, she thought I should cover her half of the rent this month to make up for it, so she could have peace of mind. I stared at the screen. The sheer entitlement was almost hard to process. She was actively sleeping with her roommate's boyfriend, gaslighting me about erasing my existence from her life, and now she was demanding I pay her rent as an apology for noticing. I showed the text to the roommate. She looked at it flatly and told me she didn't need breaks, she needed cash. The roommate had seen a confirmation email pop up on my girlfriend's iPad for a weekend cabin rental she was supposed to split with him this coming Friday. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. The anger wasn't loud. It was deeply focused. I looked at the roommate and told her we weren't letting them get away with this. She agreed. We formulated a plan right there. Confronting her normally would just lead to more gaslighting. She would cry, manipulate, spin the story, and somehow make herself the victim. She had already laid the groundwork by calling me paranoid and toxic. We needed to shatter her reality the exact same way she had shattered ours, but we needed it to be public, undeniable, and permanent. Since she wanted a clean, curated aesthetic, we decided to give it to her. We left the coffee shop and drove to a scenic park overlooking the city skyline. It was golden hour, and the lighting was perfect. The roommate and I stood close together. I put my arm around her waist, she leaned her head against my shoulder, and we took a photo. It didn't look like a friendly selfie. It looked intimate. It looked like two people who were entirely wrapped up in each other. When I got home, I replied to my girlfriend's demanding text message from earlier. I told her she was right, that I would stop being paranoid, and I apologized. I told her I would come by her place on Friday evening to drop off the rent money. She replied instantly, thanking me and saying she was glad I was finally seeing reason. For the next 2 days, I packed up everything in my apartment that belonged to her. Her clothes, her spare chargers, the expensive skincare products she left in my bathroom. I boxed it all up with meticulous care. I didn't say a word to her. I let her believe she had won, that she had successfully manipulated me into paying for her romantic getaway with the man she was hiding from her own roommate. Friday rolled around. She texted me at 5 p.m. saying she was heading out to dinner with coworkers and wouldn't be back until late, but that I could leave the rent money on the kitchen counter since I had a spare key. She was, of course, heading to the hotel to meet the roommate's boyfriend. I drove over to the apartment. The roommate was waiting inside. We positioned her laptop on the kitchen island, open to the joint credit card statement she shared with her boyfriend, the one he had arrogantly forgotten to remove her from, which clearly showed all the local hotel charges and expensive dinners. Beside the laptop, I placed the boxes of my girlfriend's belongings. Then I pulled out my phone. I uploaded the photo of the roommate and me at the park. I tagged the roommate. I changed my relationship status to in a relationship with her. She immediately accepted the tag and shared the post to her own timeline. Now, we just had to wait for the blast radius to reach the hotel. It took exactly 45 minutes. My phone started vibrating violently on the kitchen counter. Call after call, text after text. I ignored all of them. The roommate was sitting on a bar stool, casually sipping herbal tea, her phone equally blowing up with messages from her cheating boyfriend. He was panicking. 10 minutes later, the front door of the apartment unlocked, and my girlfriend burst inside. She looked frantic, her hair slightly messy, her face flushed with absolute rage. She held up her phone, the screen displaying my new relationship status, and started screaming, asking what the heck this was, if I was out of my mind, and if it was some kind of sick joke. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the cardboard boxes stacked neatly by the door. Then she looked at the roommate, who was still calmly stirring her tea. I kept my voice perfectly even and told her I wasn't being paranoid anymore. I was just curating my grid for a clean aesthetic. Her mouth opened and closed. She looked from me to her roommate. The realization of what was happening slowly crept over her features, replacing the anger with sheer panic. She stammered out that we were insane, trying to regain control of the narrative. She looked at her roommate and claimed I was obviously trying to get back at her because I was insecure, begging her not to let me drag her into my toxic delusions. The roommate slid off the bar stool, tapped the laptop screen, and calmly stated that she knew about the hotel. She knew about Chicago, and she knew about the cabin rental she was planning to use my rent money for this weekend. My girlfriend froze. Her eyes darted around the room. She was backed into a corner, completely exposed. And true to her entitled nature, instead of showing an ounce of remorse, she immediately resorted to the absolute dirtiest trick she could think of. She hissed that we couldn't do this to her. She grabbed her own forearm and dragged her fingernails down her skin hard enough to leave deep, angry red welts. Before either of us could fully register what she was doing, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. She started crying into the phone, her voice instantly dropping into a terrifyingly convincing sob, claiming her ex-boyfriend broke into her apartment, was destroying her things, and had violently grabbed her. She hung up and glared at me, with pure malice. She told me I was going to jail. Then she pointed at the roommate and said she was getting a restraining order against me, meaning I couldn't be within 500 feet of the apartment, and if the roommate invited me near there, she'd be violating a court order. She smugly declared she was keeping the apartment, and we were both done. She thought she had played the ultimate trump card. She assumed the police would arrive, see her stage scratches, see my boxes, and arrest me on the spot for domestic battery. She was trying to weaponize the legal system to avoid the consequences of her own infidelity and secure her housing by forcing the actual leaseholder out through a proxy restraining order. What she didn't know was that we live in Ohio, which is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. The moment she had burst through the front door screaming, I had subtly reached into my pocket and hit record on my phone's voice memo app. The entire interaction, from my comment about curating my grid, to the roommate confronting her about the hotel, to the distinct sound of her scratching her own arm and dialing the police, was captured in crisp, high-definition audio. She whispered to me, tears streaming down her face as we heard the distant wail of sirens, that if I didn't delete that post right now and leave, she would ruin my entire life. I didn't move an inch. I just looked at her and suggested she sit down because the police were going to want to take her statement. The police arrived 3 minutes later. 2 officers came through the open door, hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. They separated us immediately, taking my ex into the hallway and keeping me and the roommate in the living room. I could hear her in the hall, putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was sobbing, hyperventilating, claiming I had stalked her, broken in, and violently grabbed her arm when she tried to force me to leave. The officer with me asked for my ID and my side of the story. I handed him my license, kept my hands visible, and spoke with absolute calm. I explained that I was there at the invitation of the primary leaseholder, who was sitting right next to me, to drop off the belongings of my now ex-girlfriend. I told him she arrived, became irate that we discovered she was having an affair, scratched her own arm, and called 911 to falsely accuse me. I then informed him I had the entire encounter recorded with audio. The officer raised an eyebrow. I unlocked my phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed play. The audio filled the quiet living room. The officer listened to her screaming about the social media post. He heard the roommate mention the hotel. He heard the unmistakable sound of my ex threatening to ruin my life if I didn't delete the post, followed immediately by her fake distress call to 911. The officer paused the recording. He looked at me, looked at the roommate, and then walked out into the hallway. 10 minutes later, my ex-girlfriend was in handcuffs. Filing a false police report is a first-degree misdemeanor in our state. The officers didn't hesitate. They read her rights while she shrieked, no longer faking the tears. She demanded the roommate's boyfriend come help her, but he had already blocked her number the second he realized the police were involved. He wanted a secret side piece, not a public, legally compromised scandal. The fallout was systemic and absolute. Because she had committed a criminal act on the rented premises, the roommate, who was the sole primary leaseholder while my ex was legally just an authorized subtenant, issued her a formal 3-day notice to quit the very next morning. It is a standard legal procedure in our state when a tenant conducts illegal activity on the property. My ex had to scramble to move her belongings out under police supervision while facing criminal charges. But her entitlement didn't stop there. A month later, She attempted to sue me in small claims court for $5,000, claiming intentional infliction of emotional distress and demanding reimbursement for her moving expenses and a broken lease fee. I didn't even need a lawyer. We stood before the magistrate. She presented her case, claiming my social media post caused her severe psychological trauma. The magistrate asked for her evidence of severe psychiatric harm, which she obviously didn't have. Then, I presented the police report from her arrest, the audio transcript of her trying to frame me for assault, and evidence that she was legally evicted by her roommate for criminal behavior, not by my actions. The magistrate looked at her over his glasses and flatly told her she could not claim emotional distress because her own deceit was made public, nor could she sue for moving expenses when she was evicted for filing a false police report against the defendant. He called it a frivolous filing and dismissed the case with prejudice right there on the spot. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her PR firm fired her shortly after. They run strict background checks for clients handling government contracts, and a pending misdemeanor for lying to law enforcement completely destroyed the clean, professional aesthetic she was supposedly trying to curate. As for me and the roommate, we never actually dated. The post served its exact intended purpose, and we quietly took it down a few weeks later. We grab a coffee sometimes and laugh about the sheer absurdity of it all. I learned a hard lesson about trust, but I also learned that the best defense against manipulation is letting the truth speak for itself, with a little help from the voice memo app. If you want to stick around for more piping hot tea without the fake police reports, hit that subscribe button before I charge you rent for reading them.